All right, yeah, so today I'm going to be talking about putting together three really exciting JavaScript technologies in a very radical way, which can be used for both automation and testing. Also, if you guys want to follow along with this presentation, you can see the URL up there. It's just travistidwell.com, presentations, jQuery, Node, Phantom. And then also, if you want to download all the source code, I do have some examples that I go through in this presentation. You can go to GitHub. My username on GitHub is TravisT. And there you'll see a presentations directory, and there you'll see all the examples that I go through, going through this combination of these three technologies. Just a really quick introduction. My name is Travis Tidwell, as he said. I do have a Twitter handle. I'm Software Gnome on Twitter, but don't expect much from me. I don't tweet that often. And also, I'm on GitHub. I'm also the VP of Technology for a company called All Players. So if any of you guys want to check it out, it's a really cool software as a service, platform as a service. We basically do embedded online registration systems. So if you have a use case where you need some form of registration system, form collecting, data collecting, and then all the management tools that go around that, go to allplayers.com, check it out. It's all free, and you can embed it into your own website, which is pretty cool. But actually, what I'm going to get started off with is talking a little bit about the motivation on why I really wanted to talk about this and why I feel it's relevant. And as most of you already know, there are many automation and testing frameworks out there. In fact, they're springing up, probably one every month, it seems. They're all over the place. One thing that I've actually noticed, in fact, with the tool that I built, I'm not necessarily trying to replace any of those or trying to be better than any of those. I just feel like there was a certain interface advantage over jQuery, which I'll explain a little bit later. But one thing that I noticed about a lot of these frameworks is that a lot of them define their own non-familiar interfaces. So as you're learning that new testing or automation framework, you have to learn that new interface on what you do. So one might say press button to actually press a button on the screen. You pass in a tag. It may not be a sizzle selector. It may be a sizzle selector. You just have to learn that new interface. And for a lot of people who are just front-end development, they're wanting to build their own tests, they're wanting to build their own automation tools, that's somewhat of a roadblock for them to get into it. A lot of them are also not particularly suited for automation. And I think a lot of them, they do focus on testing as they should. Testing is extremely important. But there's also a lot of really big advantages to focusing on automation, web automation, building tools that make your life easier and make you more productive is something that is very relevant. And a lot of these tools don't necessarily meet those needs. A great example, a really popular testing framework is Selenium. And Selenium, it's really hard to actually pull it into a headless environment. I'll explain a little bit of what that means. And to write command line applications around Selenium, you really just can't do it. You have to build all of the tests up front and then just have them run. Also, they're not usually able to leverage additional libraries. So a lot of them are just written in their own little sandbox. And if you want to add on or add to those libraries, you have to either write those add-ons yourself, or you basically are just out of luck. Selenium is another great example of this. It's really hard to actually plug into that system. It just kind of is what it is, and it's hard to plug in. And I really feel like, and I'll explain this later, this is where the benefits of Node.js come into play, because Node.js exposes you to an entire ecosystem of additional libraries that you guys can leverage. And also, more importantly, a lot of these libraries are usually not written in JavaScript. Some of them are, but some of them are not. In fact, most of them are not. And we're all JavaScript developers here. Some of you guys may be cross languages. You may know some Ruby. You may know some Python. You may know some PHP. But for those of you who don't, you are primarily a jQuery developer. You're somewhat out of luck if you want to find a mainstream testing or automation framework, simply because you're going to have to learn a new language to write those tests. So that's actually the motivation on why I felt, whenever I was actually writing this new tool that I'm about to show you today, on why I felt it was actually relevant and it would be important, and it would also help you with your testing and automation. But before I do that, let me just talk a little bit about jQuery. Because it really all starts with jQuery, this whole interface and using that interface for automation. And I really want to start off by answering a simple question about jQuery, which is, what makes jQuery so friggin' awesome? And I really want us to think about that because, in fact, to answer this properly, I want to take us back to about 10 years ago, or it actually was not quite 10 years ago, almost a decade ago, when jQuery was still coming into its own. And if a lot of you remember, at that time, JavaScript in general was considered a toy language. It was not dependable. You would have to, if you wanted to write some very simple stuff, you would have to write it for all different browsers. And so jQuery came along and it swooped in and it really just kind of changed the playing field as JavaScript. In fact, I would even say that jQuery changed the paradigm on how we write JavaScript. There's a lot of things that it did that at the time were very radical, and of course we look at it now and they just seem like it seems like such a simple thing, but at that time it was revolutionary, and it really did change the way we write JavaScript. But not only that, it also helped make JavaScript a first-class language, which today everyone knows JavaScript is really, I mean, you could say that I'm a JavaScript developer and people aren't going to laugh at you like they would like 10 years ago. That's a true statement. In fact, I'm proud to say I'm a JavaScript developer. And jQuery made that happen. But one thing that I really want to focus on is something that jQuery did, which jQuery created an interface that is revolutionary. I mean, it seems so simple now. I know everyone probably takes it for granted, but I remember whenever jQuery first was introduced, I was like, man, this is amazing. jQuery separated the task of finding something and doing something. So you have this constructor that takes it, and its objective is to find something on the page, and then you have to call a function on that which is supposed to do something with that. And this is actually a very amazing interface, if you think about it. That interface is very powerful, and by separating the finding and doing is really what made jQuery take off the way it did. And then, of course, everyone knows you can do the method chaining with jQuery, and this is where it kind of got its logo, which is write less, do more, because that one single line 10 years ago would have been like 50 lines of code just to get it to do that. So jQuery is really great as far as interface. So now I want to talk about something that's trending fairly recently, which is JavaScript is now isomorphic. And this is actually a word that's being tossed around. A lot of you are probably familiar with this word, but for those of you who are not, basically what isomorphic means is that JavaScript can now be used for both browser and server side. And this really changes the game for JavaScript. In fact, you see a lot of libraries that are introduced now, and they say that they are isomorphic, which means that these libraries can be ran at both the browser and within the server side in Node.js. And this really opens a lot of doors for some really amazing software. In fact, it's even changing a lot of the architectures, such as MVC. There's some new architecture types that are being created, such as RVP. Are any of you guys familiar with Resource Viewer Presenter? Which is really brought about by this isomorphism of JavaScript, where you can really write a single model in JavaScript and have that ran on both client and server, and they basically synchronize with each other. Node.js is doing a lot with that type of technology. But isomorphism is great, but jQuery is written as a browser language. And so really what I want to talk about here is how can we bring that jQuery interface into Node.js? And I think more importantly, why would you even want to do that to begin with? And I think a lot of us have really realized, especially this is my first jQuery conference to come to, and one thing that I realized is that jQuery is really moving in the right direction as far as breaking out a lot of their functionality into individual components, where maybe this component may not be relevant within Node.js, but this other component is very relevant in Node.js. And so there's already an effort to do that. So jQuery is way more than just the flashy UI stuff. In fact, it makes an incredible DOM manipulator to where you can actually pass in an XML document as a string to the constructor and use jQuery to parse through that XML document. And it's for this reason that there is already a jQuery project for Node. So if you guys look for jQuery Node, you're probably going to run across this project. And basically what this project is, it's a direct port of jQuery into Node. And you can use it primarily as a wrapper to be used with a library called JS-DOM, which is a DOM implementation written completely in JavaScript that you can use within Node. So it is useful. You can use it for DOM manipulation within Node.js. So it has its advantages. But one thing that I noticed about it is it really is not intended for automation and testing. And so whenever I saw that project, I was a little bit bummed because what I want to do is write jQuery in Node and have it basically do those operations within a headless browser environment for testing. And so for that reason, I wanted to basically use jQuery to automate the web. And so that's what this next section is about. So I actually created a project that I'd like for you guys to check out. And this project is called jquery.go.js. And its primary objective is to provide a jQuery interface from Node to Phantom. So what it does is it uses the jQuery interface for testing and automation. I'll be giving you guys some examples of this. It also leverages Phantom.js for headless web browsing. So for those of you who are not familiar with Phantom.js, go to the website and take a look at it. It's a great technology. Basically what it is it allows you to run a website or the web interface or browser within a terminal. You can run it within a command line. It doesn't actually launch a UI. In fact, all of the UI is virtualized, which is somewhat a little bit hard to get a handle on whenever you're first getting familiar with it. But once you get used to it, it's really amazing. And this library is also built within the Node.js ecosystem for power and flexibility. And I'll explain where that power comes from later on in this presentation. The way I like to describe this project, it is simply the jQuery interface between Node and Phantom. It is not a port of jQuery. It provides you the jQuery interface between Node and Phantom. So let's actually get started. And for a lot of you who are not familiar with Node, it's actually real easy to install. You can go to the website and install it. Fairly simple. Once you do that, let's actually set up a project, because what I want to do is walk you through how you can use this, being jQuery developers, how you can literally use this within your shell to write your own automation tools. So you're going to actually make a directory. You can call it whatever you want. Change the directory. And then you're going to create something called a package.json file, which it's a special file that you can use that integrates with the NPM Node package manager. And basically all you have to do is give it a name and tell it that you're dependent on jQuery Go. And then after that you just type npm install. This will actually install all the requirements as well as Phantom. It will just install all of that for you. So that's all you have to do to get started. So now let's actually create an application so that I can kind of walk you through the way that this is going to work. Now one thing I am going to give you somewhat of a disclaimer, which is the interface, you are going to notice some differences between jQuery interface and this simply because of the asynchronous nature of Node communicating with Phantom.js. But I'll walk you through all of those within this presentation. So the very first thing you're going to do within your application is you're going to actually create that $ variable that everyone has come to love, and you're just going to require jQuery Go. If you're working with a website that already includes jQuery, you don't have to inject your own version of jQuery. So that basically is telling the Phantom browser that the website that I'm automating already has jQuery loaded on it. If you don't do this, it will inject its own version of jQuery into the DOM. So then at that point, there's this new command called visit. So we can actually call $visit, and we could visit the API jquery.com. And then it has this callback function. I'm going to get to this in a little bit. There's all of these nested callbacks and what we can do to solve this. Then at that point, and you can see it's already wrapping because of these nested callbacks. Then at that point, we can actually use the jQuery selectors, sizzle selectors, and we can use the val command just as you would in jQuery and assign, basically add the value each to that input. So I'm searching within the API, I'm searching for each, and then I'm going to find the search button using jQuery. All of you already know how to do this. I'm going to click, call the command click, which that'll actually click it within Phantom, and then you're actually going to wait for the page to load. Now this is one thing that's different about using this tool versus using jQuery by itself. Whenever you're using jQuery by itself, you're not used to working within multiple page loads. So writing code that is persistent amongst multiple page loads. So you would have to actually wait for the element that you're looking for to happen. Otherwise, it's just going to execute onto the next function. So then here we are. We're in this crazy method chaining. I apologize. I'm going to fix this. I promise. And then at that point, I'm going to get the text of an element that actually has to do a separate callback, and I'll resolve this here in a little bit. Another callback, and then from there I can actually console log the summary, and then I'm going to close the browser. So this is essentially what this tool allows you to do from within Node. using the jQuery interface to actually command Phantom.js to do something. So you can also, and then you can run that by typing node app.js. One thing that you probably already noticed is that everything is asynchronous. And I didn't do this because I wanted to do it. I did this because I had to do it. Whenever Node is communicating with Phantom.js, everything it does is done asynchronously, even whenever you're getting text. So in jQuery, you're used to doing this. You're used to saying, give me the H1 text, and then I'm going to console log that into the browser. Well, with this tool, you can't necessarily do that because text doesn't return anything immediately. It's done asynchronously. So you have to pass this little callback function, and that will then call the text within Phantom.js, and then it'll hand it back to your callback function. So a lot of you, I realize, are very familiar with asynchronous programming versus serial programming. Some of you may not be. Some of it may be a little bit fuzzy. If you want to use this tool, it's absolutely paramount that you know about asynchronous programming, and it's for that reason I'm going to spend like 3 minutes just kind of going over just basically the ins and outs of asynchronous versus serial. You hear these discussions happen a lot, but nobody in a presentation really breaks it down. So I'm going to break it down just really quick. So obviously everyone knows that a serial execution, we're going to start with the easiest one first. It waits for one operation to end before starting the next. So we have two functions, one called do something, another one called do something else. You can call those back to back and you get something that's very expected. This is everyone knows this. This is just reiterating what you already know. So now things start getting a little bit interesting when one of those depends on the other. So let's say you have a function called get something, and then you have a function called say something, which takes an argument, and it passes whatever that argument is. And so you would actually get something, and then you would pass that to say something, and that would actually console log that. So now we have somewhat of this dependencies between these two serial executions, but we're still serial, so it's not so confusing. So we get what we expect. So things get really interesting whenever get something depends on an asynchronous source. And this is where asynchronous kind of comes into play. So just this example on get something, instead of actually returning something, I'm going to go out to Google, I'm going to read the page, I'm going to get the response. And a lot of people, they get really confused here, especially whenever they're first getting started with asynchronous programming. Most of them are saying, they'll say, am I supposed to return the response here, like within this callback, because that's where I actually have it? What a lot of people who are just getting started with this, a lot of times what they miss is that this actually returns nothing. The function doesn't return anything. It returns undefined. So that then whenever you actually assign it to something, it's assigned as an undefined variable, and then this actually prints undefined. And developers, whenever they're first experiencing this, I mean, it's like, what in the world is going on? Your mind is blown. I can't quite understand what this is doing. And so, of course, once you actually learn asynchronous, you realize, okay, I have to do something called a callback. And so I pass in that callback, and then whenever the response has been made, I can call the callback with that. And so then I can do something like this. I can pass that callback and get something, and then I can console log it, and then it'll actually say something right there. So let's actually revisit our example here. And so we basically are doing this whole callback thing, right? Okay, so I'm getting the value. I can't get it immediately. I can't set the value immediately, so you have to do a callback. I can't click it. It's not going to happen immediately, so I have to pass in a callback. Then I have to wait for an element. I have to pass in another callback. Then I have to set the text. I have to pass in another callback. And now you see where I'm getting here. This creates something called callback hell. And a lot of you who are familiar with callback hell, it is something that will drive you insane, especially whenever you're creating code for asynchronous programming. You get into this nested mess of code. And that's actually why we have promises. I've already heard discussions in this conference about promises, but there's one in particular that I've taken an interest in, which is actually using a library called async.js. In fact, actually, from a couple of the presentations I went to today, I might have to investigate. It seems to be very similar to the deferred class within jQuery. So I'll have to investigate the deferred class and maybe possibly use that. But for this presentation, I'm going to talk about async. Excuse me. So basically what async.js does is it basically uses this asynchronous control flow to provide a serial appearance. It's also an implementation of JavaScript promises, which have been described in previous presentations. Basically, a promise is a way that you can take asynchronous code and turn it into what looks to be like a serially executable functions. It's also isomorphic, which is really cool because you can actually use async.js in the browser, just like you can in Node, which is really cool. You can actually use all of these methods by pulling in the library. So to install async.js within Node, it's actually very simple. You just add it as your dependency and then type npm install. And once you actually have that, let me actually walk you through the usage of how to use it. So async, there's something that's called async series, which essentially will solve the problem that I just had. In async series, you just pass in an array as the first argument, and that array is all of the functions that you want to call. But the cool thing is every single callback, it provides this done function, and then when you're done with the first task, you call that done function, then it moves on to the next one. It passes a done function. When you're done with it, it calls the done function. And then when all of them are done, it calls the very last callback with an async series, and that gets called when everything's completed. So this is actually a great way for us to take all of that nested mess and turn it into something that's actually readable. And so let's actually look at the before example, which is what you see here. And a lot of you are going to be very disappointed, but the after looks like this. And so a lot of you are saying, okay, that sucks more. It's more code. It's harder to read. However, it is in somewhat of a serialized way. We don't have the nestedness anymore, but you also notice there's something that's going on here, which is there's a pattern. You see this function done, function done, function done, function done. That's passed as the last argument to every single one. Anytime you see a pattern like this in JavaScript, you can always fix it. JavaScript is so moldable, you can actually fix it pretty easily. Now, async does have a method that fixes this, which is called async apply. You can use that as long as you are not passing in a method that has context. So if you use the this pointer inside that method, you can't use it. It won't work. And also, if you have arguments that need to be evaluated at the time that that method is ran, not whenever it's actually added to the async series, it won't work. For this reason, I created two new methods attached to the library called Go. And this is actually where I got the name, jquery.go.js. So you can actually use it by typing $go and then whatever method you want to call on the $sign object. You can also use it with the selector, so you can actually select an item and say go, and then pass whatever method you want to attach there. And so this actually makes it somewhat usable. In fact, it turns it into something that looks like this. So within there, you're going to say go visit api.jquery. Now we're going to find the input search. We're going to cite go. We're going to call the val command on that selector. We're going to add the each command. We're going to go find the button, click it. And then from there, we're going to wait for the element to appear on the page. When that's called, it's going to call I'm going to get the text, console log the summary, and then close. If you actually ran this in Node, it would work. It would actually go out to jQuery API, do a search, and give you the result of the first method. So this is actually something that's a little bit more digestible. This is example 3 inside of that repo. If you guys want to actually go run it, it will work. So let's actually take you through another example. And it starts getting interesting when you use iterations, iterators, and especially with like the each command. That's why I wanted to spend some time to actually talk about each. How much time do I have? I have till 3:20, right? I need to hurry. So async, it allows you to, so there is this each method. So the first thing we're going to do is go to API, jQuery. I'm going to now iterate over each one of the titles that are added. Now, the each method, there's an extra command, there's an extra argument. If you guys haven't noticed, there's a callback at the very end. And the reason why I had to do that is because you may want to do something inside of each item, such as click something, go to a different page, that you don't want it to immediately iterate over the next one. And so that's why there's that done method. So here I'm actually calling, you can call this, which is actually referencing that item that you're selecting. I want to get the text of that item and console log that. That will console log everything within the search. Pretty cool. Let me just talk real quickly over extending jQuery Go. So here's a good example if you want to create a login. I'm real involved in Drupal CMS. So here's me creating a method to go visit Drupal.org. Go to user. I'm going to provide my name, my password. I'm gonna talk about this in a little bit on putting passwords in your code. And then I'm going to click the submit button, and then I'm going to wait for the page. We are now logged in. Here's something really cool. Because it's headless, you can't really get any visual feedback. However, you can take screenshots. So you can say $capture and save it as a PNG. It'll save that page as a PNG. It's really cool. And then I'm going to close the browser. So that's actually really cool, but this is a method that I may want to reuse over and over and over again. So what you can actually do is you can create a new method, assign it to the $ called login, copy and paste all of that, and so now we have something that looks like this that we can reuse over and over and over again. So you can actually say $go login, username, password. Now let's fix this problem with passwords. And this is really where leveraging Node.js comes into play. And something that you can't do in a lot of other testing and automation frameworks. So the example that you just saw was the login mechanism. I want to fix that username password. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is using configurations. So you can use a library called enconf. This is a Node.js library. It allows you to basically provide, here's the installation, pretty easy. It allows you to create a configuration file to provide to your scripts. So in this example, I created a configuration called user Travis T. And then, of course, there's my password still in raw text. People are already still cringing. I will fix it. So that's pretty cool. So I can actually then create this, use it this way where I can actually initialize it. You can accept argument variables. It can accept environment variables. Or you can open up the configuration file. Pretty cool. And then you just use config get user and pass to actually get those values and stuff it. But now you're saying, okay, password is now, you just moved it. You just moved it to a config file. What do I do here? Well, let's use something. Let's actually command line and prompt this thing so that whenever I run this command, it prompts me for the password. And so there's a library called prompt. And I think you guys are starting to realize the power here. Node.js really opens the doors for all of these libraries you can bring in and leverage. So here I'm actually going to prompt, I'm going to get the password. I'm going to hide it from the terminal so you don't see it when I type it. And then I'm going to configuration set it. And then I'm actually going to log in. I'm going to pass in the get user. And then I have to use a callback for the argument. And the reason why I have to do that is because this is basically saying don't evaluate it when it's actually being added to the series. Evaluate it when it's actually ran. So when it's actually ran, that password has already been set. It'll return it, and then that will actually work to log in, and all of that's awesome. So, as a finale, I want to walk you through a real-world example on a tool that I actually built that shows off this power, these feature sets. And my motivation came from this XKCD comic. A lot of you are familiar with this. It's basically saying, hey, make me a sandwich. What? Make it yourself. Sudo, make me a sandwich. Okay. I really wish it worked like this in real life, but it does not. So what I actually did is took this as a motivation to create something called makemeasandwich.js. And basically what this does, and if you can read the description here, it is a Node.js, Phantom.js command line application that will automatically order you a sandwich from Jimmy John's. But it does more than that. It's an interface. It walks you through a command line interface. And so here's how you do it. You can actually npm install this on a global scale, so you can actually call it from the command line. You provide a config file. This is the config file that I just showed you. And it's all the stuff. Notice how I kept my favorite sandwich and my work address as the default configuration. Hint, hint, if anybody wants to buy me a sandwich. I'm just waiting for the day when I go to work and there's a Jimmy John's guy waiting there with a sandwich from Anonymous. Okay, so anyway. Then you can actually type, make me a sandwich, and pass in the config file. And I've done a recording on what this actually looks like. So here I'm actually sudo make me a sandwich. I'm passing in the config file. This is logging in. So here I'm actually typing my password. You notice you don't see it. So this actually illustrates, you can actually build command line tools around automation. So it found my sandwich. It's customizing my order. It's asking me, do I want a drink? I'm just saying no. Pickles, cookies. Okay, so here's like credit card information. You don't want to put your credit card information in a config file. You want to type it out as you're running it. So that's where prompt comes into. It's like, okay, what's the expiration? So here I type the expiration. It asks what's the name on the card or the code on the back. I type that, and then it runs, and then 10 freaky fast minutes later, a sandwich shows up at your door. Yeah, so that is basically a real-life example that you guys can go out, run yourself, and just to show you the power of this. So in closing, I just want to say that jQuery is way more powerful than you guys realize. You now have this new tool at your fingertips. If you're only a jQuery developer, there is no reason why you can't create your own automation and testing tools using this new system, which is that interface from Node to Phantom. So that's it, guys. Happy automating. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.